What is a healthy lifespan for an MMO population trend? Should it impact feedback ingestion? Chris, do you want to jump us through the first paragraph?
Were people playing MMORPGs for 2.5 months a healthy behavior? So all these trends I'm seeing, it's raised a few questions. So first of all, what do you think, Brian?
So I think that actually ends up being a healthy behavior. I think one of the things, the biggest misconception in the MMORPG is that it's like you need people playing it constantly, especially in the more modern, nature in which that revenue is generated outside of the subscription fee model, where essentially like in the older model, that's where you kind of saw the sandbox more or less thrive. But if we're actually going to look and compare numbers to numbers, like the sandbox model compared to the theme park clearly has that design. And what you see has evolved from that within the theme park design is the ability for people to catch up, because they recognize if the goals keep getting higher and higher, at some point you end up making it a disincentive for people to kind of jump back in. So roughly speaking, when you start thinking about how much time you end up spending with your average game, I would say 2.5 months out of a given year is a lot of time to play a game. The average gamer plays 8.3 hours per week. I always factor it up a little bit more for MMOs. I always kind of give MMOs players like 12, where before it was 7.1 hours per week before COVID. And then essentially I was kind of giving MMO players like 10. So if like you think about that average, if you're thinking about that, that's more than 40 hours a month. That's more than 80 hours to 100 hours of gameplay, which is roughly right in line with what the content offering of these MMORPGs actually truly deliver. And then what they do is they give you all this additional optional content that you can choose to engage with if you want, deliver content, and then also allow people to take breaks from that content so that however long that break is, they're always willing. They already own the game. The barrier for entry to get back into it ends up being rather low. And so they can kind of come back and check in from time to time. A lot of people are craving the MMO that to consume them for like 10 years, like where this is the only game that I'm going to play. This is the world I'm going to live in. This is the community that I'm going to be a part of. This is the only thing I'm going to be living in. And I don't think that the games that are coming out can deliver on that, especially with how the internet, social media, and content creation solves the MMO, solves the these things, and the discussions go. What do you think about anything I just said?
Yeah, I think that the healthy cycle is to be able to take breaks. I think to view a game more seasonally and say, you know what, in the summer, I have all these things going on in my life, and this is the game that I'm going to pair with that, and so on, and rotate throughout the year. And maybe for you, that's the different seasons of one game. I mean, there is a different seasonal element to the 0.3 patch feels drastically different in Final Fantasy 14 than a 0.0 patch. They just feel different. And so even if you just choose to re-up within the same game, it still changes. And that allows them to kind of morph that with these patch updates, either to an existing MMO or for new MMOs. I think having them develop blindly with no feedback, more than 100, 200 hours of content for an individual player, what are the odds they get it right? What are the odds that player then consumes that at the right pace, that it feels healthy and they don't feel overwhelmed at any point, but they don't feel like it's hopeless at any point, and alternatively, they don't feel like they have to binge it. And so slow releasing it in these kind of like 80 to 200 hour type sprints, I think has worked really well for games and has made it feel like you're getting like a new game within a game, rather than dropping like 1,000 hours at once. Picking up a new existing MMO can be incredibly overwhelming because you are getting that. You're getting thousands of hours all at once, and it's too much. And so these new player experiences are a lot of times about shortening that curve to get you back into something reasonably healthy. Otherwise, it still feels very overwhelming. That's the problem that Final Fantasy is struggling with for new players, is that they hit you with this number that doesn't wear off. They hit you with a lot more than 2.5 months worth of content for the typical player. For a new player, they have a ton to get through. And the ones that want that, it's this joyous moment because very few games offer it. But the ones that don't, it's not optional. So it can be incredibly overwhelming. Where the second half of this gets into is I went out and criticized it day and date. And so this is a little like saying, okay, well, the average marriage has low points. Say we have some data set that says year 7 is always a little bit rough on people. And so I went out on somebody's wedding day and said, year 7 sucks, huh? And then people downvoted me. Like people said, dude, you shouldn't say that on the wedding day. Am I wrong? And so I do take the second half as like, you're a little ahead of the curve. Your feelings are valid that you think, it's hopeless because Brimstone didn't fix your issues with New World day and date on the day of patch. But why don't you just let people have their fun who are having fun on Brimstone? And then you can say that, don't worry, Brimstone newness will wear off. They'll all get there. And then you guys can all complain together on that back half. Because I do see people saying like, oh my gosh, Final Fantasy is the game for me. I could never picture playing another game. And then you say, man, I'm playing Guild Wars right now. And they're like, why? Final Fantasy is so much better. And then that very same person puts out a video or a Reddit post or whatever now. And they're like, I'm trying Guild Wars for the first time. It's amazing. And you're like, well, am I right? Because I said it then? Well, you're both right. Like they were enjoying Final Fantasy when it was new. And now they're enjoying Guild Wars. And that is the correct way to play. Enjoy this, enjoy this. That's the correct way. You jumped to Guild Wars early, and now you were enjoying Guild Wars then, and maybe now you're enjoying New World. That's also the correct way to play. The correct way to play is to play the way that's fun for you. So I wouldn't worry too much about who is right and who is wrong in that context of like, my opinion over time became more correct, unless you're somebody that's putting out like predictions and you're like, okay, and I've written those in stone and we're going to go back and check in. I would say you had an opinion then, you have an opinion now. Your opinion may change. It may stay the same. Either way, it was still a valid opinion day and date on Brimstone for you not to like the game, the very same way it was day and date okay for those other people to be super freaking excited about the upcoming Fresh Start servers. Those are both really valid because what we're talking about here is feelings. They didn't say like, I thought that player numbers would just drop again, and they said I was wrong, and it turned out I was right. That would be an objective fact, but that's not what was said here. What was said here is I criticize something. That's a feeling. Feedback is mostly feelings, and so it is really fickle.
And these games have the ability to invoke that feeling, that connection, and that's why I like the MMO specifically. It's not just a game; it's a service. It's also a community. It has all these extra elements into it. That's where, like, when it comes down to like everything, kind of gets back into numbers because those numbers represent kind of the ideal of fear. Because it's like I want to maybe spend more time with it, but am I wasting my time? Is my investment in my character, are they at some point going to go away? Like all these other games have failed. And the other thing that even the Screw brings up is that we also have a ton more option nowadays. One of the things we talked about in talking about Josh's video about how games have devolved and, the industry is just only gotten worse. It's like, no, there's so many more options. There's a lot of things that are requesting your attention, where before you had like 2 or 3 to choose from. So the people who were interested in that kind of game didn't have 30, options, and thus the pool of people were lessened. It was, now it's like, okay, yeah, you could go play Final Fantasy, or you could go play WoW, or you could play New World, or you could play Guild Wars, or you could play ESO, or you could then go down a rabbit hole of these other, MMOs that are kind of just out there, but they're not necessarily driving in a huge chunk of traffic. Things like Warframe, or things like Path of Exile. And so there's just many more options outside of single player games, outside of, in a way, MMO lights, like when you start thinking about it. Or to kind of add on to that, Game Pass and PlayStation Plus offering for the same price, you would kind of assume would be your subscription to an MMO, countless additional games, new games that are coming in and changing, and there's plenty of things to be distracted by. And in my mind, when it comes down to it, wherever you put your money, and if, as long as you're having fun, you're doing it right, Now, the article or the post here continues to go on and says, talk about a few questions. And they say, first, what do you think is a healthy lifespan for an MMORPG release population trend? And when is that content that is being released for pre-existing MMORPGs? Should you see these population spikes only lasting 1 to 3 months? Or is the healthy thing for these things to last much longer? So what do you think? Because like we kind of brought up 2.5, roughly about 3 months. How does that make you feel in terms of the content?
I think anything between like a 2 and 5 month trend is healthy depending on the game, because you have all those secondary things. How many of there are those? How many of those are worth doing? Things like raid progression, things like slow grinding achievements, things like that. You want people that want to do those to feel like they have time, and people, and if you have built into your game that you want your player base to take breaks, you want them to finish your content and take the break just in time to come back for your next content push. You don't want them to be on break and no intention of coming back when you drop your next patch. So I think it's going to vary game to game as far as when those spikes happen and how big those spikes are compared to the non-spikes. I think that's perfectly healthy. I think it's fine. I think this idea that we're going to have it dialed to 11 all the time is insane. Like you can't live like that. It's nice to have some lulls. It feels better than if like every moment is this epic big quest. Like at some point, I'm just going to go do something else. Mm-hmm. The winter break in TV shows, you can't wait for it to come back, but it also gives you a second to like do other things. And you don't feel like, oh, it's just taking up, like I didn't want to watch it this week, but I don't want to be behind. So I think it's really nice. As far as like lifespan, like how often should they do big content releases? Obviously the every other year model has been quite good. That's given them enough time to develop something that big, but not so much time that you end up kind of
forgetting about it
out. And so we see, Guild Wars has, whether or not it was intentionally experimented with having a longer cycle between expansions. And the game kind of falls into oblivion where people are like, what's Guild Wars? Is that game still around? And like it was still around. It was still healthy. It still had a player base, but it ended up kind of being forgotten because there was no big press releases. But on the other hand, I think annualized franchises, things like Call of Duty and FIFA, can start to feel a little bit like vultures, a little bit like, didn't I just give you money? And so I think somewhere around that 2.5 year cycle also feels really healthy. So maybe anything that's a multiple of 2.5 is healthy. I don't know.
Yeah, when it comes out, like I think essentially that time frame is also be coupled with that level of that spike, right? So if you see that spike usually is encompassing content, why you'll hear us continue to say content is king. And I think honestly, like 3 months is, I think, really healthy because you can divide a year up into 4 seasons, each lasting 3 months. And if you kind of have that cycle, it gives you the option to jump in and jump out. And what we're seeing is that you kind of end up having kind of a category of, like Chris brought up, the once every 2 years. That's the 14 and WoW model. But then you also have the every year model like ESO and Destiny and and in a way, New World maybe, because we saw a big update with the Brimstone Sands. And they're already teasing a big update this year, and we don't know what that actually entails. Is that an expansion, like a massive update? Once this year is done, we'll have a much better picture of what we think AGS and New World will do. And it could be that New World's on a 2-year cycle where every year ends up being kind of a big moment once a year with the other seasonal content. And then every 2 years is the big, is that big milestone achievement. But we can only speculate on what they're doing there. Second, they ask, does this mean during these short spurts of the population spikes that last 1 to 3 months, feedback that is submitted should be taken differently? This is something interesting. Specifically, blind praise. This is the blind defense from, this game's perfect. You're in a hype cycle. It's that honeymoon phase. So essentially, if you're seeing that kind of people that praising the game and claiming that it's safe, should that actually be taken with a grain of salt? There is also a high chance that players won't be around in 1 to 3 months. Or on the flip side, if someone's being overly critical, should they be taken with less sincerity as they are not essentially a stable, loyal audience? What do you think about that question?
I do think context matters. The grain of salt thing doesn't make sense because I will tell you that if a game launches like Forspoken is right now and there are negative views on day 1, that also is indicative of a problem. Like it should be an exciting day, right? And so if you see, so they use the honeymoon phase, I used the relationship analogy earlier. If you see a couple bickering on their wedding day and they're at each other's throats and their families talking trash about the other one the whole time, that's a bad sign, more so than if that happens in year 7, because that's an easy day. It's an easy win. Any of you who have been married and had the chance to take a honeymoon, my wife and I took our honeymoon immediately after being married, and I spent basically all the money I had to find a deal on an all exclusive, all included or whatever. Didn't turn out everything was. Trip in Belize. And so we were off in Belize, sitting there drinking Mai Tais on a beach. It was really easy to be married. super easy. If the whole thing had just been Mai Tais on a beach and a private hut to ourselves, it would have been really easy to stay married the whole time. That was great. That's not reality, but it was a really great time. And what that means is that if there were cracks showing then, that would have been wildly problematic. If we had been like, God, I'm so bummed she's here, that would have been a problem. That would have been a huge problem. And so the blind praise is valuable because the blind praise is there. It's deserved. Everything up to that point, we dated for a while. We were engaged for a while. We had this huge celebration. And then we were on this honeymoon. All that blind praise was earned through that entire process. And it's very valid and it's deserving. Being proud of a developer the day they give us content, yeah, that's the day to tell them thank you. So if somebody brings you a Christmas gift or a birthday gift and your response is, well, 5 months ago, you borrowed something of mine, didn't give it back. Not the right moment, man. Like, just say thank you. Like, can we just be happy in this moment where we're exchanging gifts or cards or whatever? And then we can go back to bickering about who owes who $5 later. Like right now, let's just enjoy this moment for what it is. And I think that's very valid. And that honeymoon phase is earned. That's something that like Dragonflight launch should be exciting. And if there are problems with Dragonflight launch, that's alarming because this should be the honeymoon phase. The other side of it is that if somebody is being critical, there is an idea in game dev that if somebody really just didn't like you and didn't think the game could be good or saved, they would just leave. There's no point in telling you. There's no point in complaining. You're not going to get better. I went to a different grocery store than I normally went to this week. I bought a bag of avocados. They looked like reasonably priced. They were all really ready to go, like super ripe, very soft. I was going to make them into what we call avocado pasta very quickly within a couple days. So I grabbed this bag and I got up there and the barcode is on each individual avocado. And the freaking cashier grabs the bag and is just flopping it on the thing until it scans. I will not be going back to that grocery store, but I didn't take the time to complain. I didn't pull a manager. I actually out loud, I said, come on, dude. And he didn't even look up. I just stared at him. I was like, are you being serious? Like, is he messing with me? I won't go back to that grocery store. Why would I go somewhere? I'm trying to eat healthier. Produce is going to be part of that. If you're going to just take my produce that I carefully selected for the right ripeness for me, and you're just going to bash the hell out of it every time I make it to the register, I'm not going to buy groceries from you. It's not worth complaining because I don't care if you get better. I'll just shop somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So the fact that somebody's taking the time to log out of the game, log on to the forums, verify their account, whatever, go to the right post, this is how I'm feeling, says, I believe you can get better. If Brian had bruised my avocados, I would have said, Brian,
the hell, dude?
What the hell, dude? And we would have had a conversation. Can you be more careful with my produce in the future?
Can you also replace my avocados?
And you would have said, yeah, I didn't think about that. I didn't think about the fact that avocados are fragile. My bad. And there would have been an investment there because I want this to get better. And so if somebody is complaining, they are part of the loyal audience. That doesn't mean they should complain on day one. Like, unless it's, hey, the servers are down on day one, but just like, hey, it's day one. How come the combat's not perfectly balanced? I can't believe this is a trash game. Yeah, give it a second, man. It's got to go to space and back. Can you just give it a second?
Yeah, I want to always like encourage feedback. And the thing is that just as the only thing you can control is yourself, right? Like I cannot sit here and control like your emotions and feedback, nor do I want to, nor do you want me to. Like the relationship is you do you, right? But whenever I look at these things, like what can I control? And it's like, honestly, I want to encourage people to continue to get that feedback, but also to learn more about themselves, like understand the emotions that you're feeling and take a hard look at, is this being skewed based off of a honeymoon effect? Or am I just bitter? Am I just angry? And am I not addressing maybe a root issue? So then it says, this is something that I've talked about for years with my friends. I've seen a few content creators like Asmongold call them MMORPG nomads. This section of players is essentially go between all the MMOs. They play for 1 to 3 months. The new content releases, get bored and less desire and play. And then they go to another MMO that has been released. Raises a lot of questions of how developers should treat this section of the audience compared to one who may stick around. Does a Nomad have more or less to say when it comes to the design of the MMO? What do you think?
I think you cater both. I think you can do both. You want to build things for the kind of player that sticks around. That player plays the game differently
Hmm.
than a player that's going to be a bit of that Josh Strife Hayes locust, where they're going to come in and consume the crop and move on. But you also want to put something out to draw in those locusts. There are a lot of them, and they're valuable, and it's fun to be in a game when it's new and have that many other people. So if there's only 10 people in your regular group when on a regular basis, that's really fun. I love the mid-cycle stuff in 14 because it feels more intimate. It's just those of us that truly love the game and are sticking around. But it's fun to have all the extra people there on patch day who don't know what's going on, and it's their first time in a long time, and they're excited. And those people might be nomads, and they're welcome for while they're here. They're tourists, and that's great. And so you want to have something for them as well, especially if you talk about it being 1 to 3 month cycles. There's a lot more than 4 MMOs on the market. And so realize that you got to do something for them because there's more than 4 MMOs out there. And so if they're only trying 4 or 5 MMOs in a year, how do you get on that short list?
Yeah.
Because the Nomads aren't hitting all of them. They're hitting a section of just how big this genre has gotten. So I think the developers need to try to tackle all levels of players. And that means everything from casual to hardcore, lots of play hours to little play hours, playing regularly throughout the year or just seasonally, play with their friends or play alone. All of these different play styles all deserve a place. We are each our own little weird shaped, those charts that have the different attributes. We're all our own weird shape. I'm really heavily on the solo play, but I'm really want challenging content, or maybe you're more narrative based or whatever. We're all some portion of all of those things. And they're trying to create something that can fit each and every one of our little thumbprints as a player in a big shared space. That's what makes MMOs special. Is they're not truly perfect for any one of us, but they really do a pretty good job of satisfying all of us, even though we're so different.
Now, a Raging Cyclone chimes in and says that they kind of disagree with that. Nomads are transitory and don't allow for somebody to build a budget. Instead, a build for a core audience that is the foundation and grow from that. What do you think about that?
I mean, the core is an incredibly important portion. You can't only receive money once every 2 years. That's a very scary business model.
Yeah.
There are seasonal industries out there, and every year you have to crush it or you just go under. So you want a core audience as your basis, but you want to offer that core audience something spectacular with expansions. And that means it costs more than your core audience offers for the maintenance stuff, the patches. And so that is what the Nomads pay for, because the Nomads absolutely come to town. And yeah, they just come to town for the fair and they leave litter everywhere and it's a mess, but they also bring a big pile of money with them. And so I think it's both. I think you do want that core audience. You need to maintain them, but that core audience on its own, the problem with the core audience is people still fall out of it. They still eventually take a break from that game, or eventually kind of metaphorically, that character eventually kind of dies out. It ages out. And so the other advantage of all the Nomads is those Nomads are also capable of being converted. Some people are like, yeah, I used to jump games a lot, and I just keep sticking with this one for some reason.
This one
I
really
used to only play it once a year. Now I play it every 6 months, and I think come this expansion, I want to stick around the whole time. And they can replace some of those core gamers, that bleed off.
Yeah, I would kind of say that the Nomad. And that's just where really your marketing and your whatever, whether you want to call it seasonal content strategy comes into play, because it's about making multiple invitations for people to come back and check out your game. So that way you're not just dipping in every other year. That ends up becoming kind of the monetization strategy. And that's why I actually see more and more the move to the battle pass, the season pass kind of model. And my hope is that within the MMOs is that they don't expire, because I think especially with MMOs, they have this mindset of this long-term grind, a much more deeper, sense of investment that you can make into your character. And I think, and if you pair that with more FOMO, I don't think that ends up being healthy. And the other side we see especially with whether you call them settlers or the core gamer, when they generally leave because of how their investment is, it's usually not an amicable split. More often than not, like when I see people complain about a game that I'm talking about and I'm excited about, like Destiny, Final Fantasy back in the day, so many people would come in and they're like, I put 10,000 hours in this game and it's the worst game ever made. It's like, I put tons of hours into in Final Fantasy. I feel like I left on good terms. Like, I love the game. I want it to be a good game, But I've also made my investment, and I feel like it was a good opportunity to move on, as opposed to where when I read people's comments, like I've put in X amount of thousand hours and this game sucks. And it's like, I don't think they're relating that kind of critique actually correctly, because clearly there was something that had you in the game for that long. And to say that it sucks would be kind of strange. Like you'd call out maybe a specific change that you don't appreciate or agree with. That makes more sense in that context. But I think if it's kind of like, I mean, almost you could kind of pivot this question into like, do you just cater to the hardcore or the casual, like within that regards? And I always say like there's a symbiotic relationship that these two groups have in common, and it's that they both need each other. You need the hardcore to kind of inspire and to give aspirational content that the casual player would see and say, oh man, that looks really interesting. That fight looks really interesting. I want to find out how I can do that. And the answer is going to be invest more time into the game. I think as long as you're having fun with the game, that's good. Now, here's the real kicker, like when it comes to feedback, right? Because not all feedback is equal. One of the things that's actually very difficult to do on social media is determine authority and to determine like, is this valid feedback? Because that's where you categorize feedback in two ways. Are you hearing and are you listening? Like, we're hearing you, but we're really not listening to what you have to say, you know, versus like listening implies, in my mind, an understanding of the core issue. And the answer could very well be no, because gamers will optimize the fun out of everything. And if you end up just listening to an overwhelming majority of people who say, you know, can't you just put autoplay in this game? Because that would be really great for me. Oh, that kind of really does overall hurt the vision for the game. But you have to kind of take that feedback in and quantify it. And they have people whose full-time job is to do that, is to also look into it. Like what kind of player is this player? What kind of feedback is that? And then do we agree with that kind of feedback for our vision for the game itself? And everything kind of goes through these filters, gets categorized, and then gets prioritized. And the answer very well might be, and might need to be, no. But that's always going to be that ebb and flow, because like in Yoshi P's case for 14, he says he wants to make the game that the vast majority of the community wants, you know, and, you know, then he asks like, do you want free to play? And the vast majority say no. So it's like, cool, we're good. But if everybody was saying that, I think that's where you see it. And so I do think that feedback is automatically weighted. I don't think that the average viewer, like in our case, or the Reddit poster, the commenter, has that same feeling. They feel like a streamer might outweigh, you know, gamer feedback. And I don't think that's the case either. But, you know, their streaming is more in the form of marketing than it is an actual, like them, like legitimately saying, oh, you know, Asmon wanted a great sword in New World, so we put that as the priority over anything else. I don't think that's actually how that worked out. What do you think, Chris?
I mean, I think the other thing about feedback is to keep in mind that, you know, as you start to look at things like that, where they're doing it to cater to this particular set of players or something like that, how are they stating their opinion? How is it coming across? When you just say, make the game good, that's not really actionable. Stop making bad content, that's not really actionable. So
yeah,
the group that does a really good job making their opinion both heard and understood also has a higher chance of seeing some semblance of it changing. So you also have people that start to have really good kind of shepherds of that, going onto forums or posting YouTube videos or to Twitter or wherever it is. You don't have to be a content creator, but there are people that do a really good job of taking that view and going and having the metaphorical equivalent of signatures, having universal support from a group, from an audience, but also taking the time to, you see in 14, there have been raiders that have taken the time to put big, beautiful posts over on the forums that have gotten a lot of shares and likes and all that. And it's like, okay, so I can see a lot of people agree with what this person is saying. And this person has taken the time to talk about, here are some areas on what's going right. Here's some areas that are what's going poorly. And here's what I think is causing that, and the trend that I think could move us in a better direction. I'm not telling you, if you don't do this, I'll quit. Like, I'm not holding the devs hostage. I'm just saying, like, these are the sorts of things to put in there. And then they say, okay, we have a general ability to steer the ship. Yes, let's factor that in. Let's steer the ship slightly left. Yoshi P has actually talked about with Final Fantasy 14 development that, you know, we have system A and system B in the development, and we decide to go with system A. And then universally, players without even knowing about system B say, man, I wish they'd done system B. And we're like, crap. But we're already in the process of putting system 2A in the game. versus 2B in the game.
Mm.
And we can't just rip the cord off and then go put 2B in the game. That doesn't make any sense. So what we really end up doing is doing a 2A with a couple elements from B, and we begin steering the ship in that way. And so over several patches, we can keep steering. So that continued feedback that's filled with clarity and thoughtfulness and understanding and a little bit of patience tends to actually be what gets more response, assuming that they have the methods in place to listen, which comes down to like community managers and all these things that are really hard jobs. They're very hard jobs, and they don't tend to be the most glorious. They tend to be like, when I see layoffs, they for some reason always seem to be some of the first to go.
Right.
And yet without them, like now, even if you put a really coherent argument out there, who's receiving it on the other end?
Very, very, very true. Well, guys, that wraps us up for the discussion and the conversation. I think those are some really interesting questions, and yeah, Reddit thread was really interesting to see. I feel like it's kind of like what we've been saying. It seems to be at least more and more people recognizing that within the genre and how it kind of has these seasons and ebbs and flows. And I hear the counter argument: people don't want that seasonal model, but it's essentially what is ultimately right now working, and maybe that will change. Like, I think when we were talking about it in Discord, looking at what future technologies and things like that can bring into the space, like with AI, quantum computing, and things like that. Like, if you were going to say, like, when should Square Enix, what target should Square Enix set for the next, if they were going to make another Final Fantasy MMO? And I think when we were kind of like saying, like, kind of spec for PlayStation 6, because it's going to take you that long to make an MMO. These are the technologies that are, delving. And then when you start to think about it, like, you could actually have an MMO that really hits a next gen, something that cannot be done today, but soon will or might be able to. And some of those technologies like cloud computing and things like that have already, come and are starting to be taken advantage of by the current modern MMO, like something like New World. And we'll have to see how that kind of plays out over the course of the next, decade plus, because there's some really cool things being developed. When we start talking about Chat GPT and what have you, like, the AI could have a really interesting impact into immersion into MMOs. And so it's going to be something that we'll see how that evolves over the course of the next several years. So it should be pretty exciting regardless. Now, of course, you got anything you want to share or anything you want to promote before we wrap up today's show?
No, I'm about to take a little bit of a breather and go get some food and then come back and watch some Ultimate Prog and 14. So nothing big. Should be a good week. A little more Guild Wars, a little more New World this week. Lots of streams, and then I will be off all of next week and the following Monday. So nothing big. We have lots of things pre-recorded, so hopefully the gaming kind of side of thing just keeps chugging. And yeah, it's a good time to be a gamer.
Absolutely. I'll be giving you guys my impressions here for the Forspoken PC version cool. As soon as I have them, and we'll be looking forward to some fun stuff to be had in February. Maybe we'll get that Witch Queen raid down in Destiny and whatnot. So, all right, guys, I'm gonna hit end broadcast over here on the YouTube side. Thanks so much for hanging out. You can go hang out on Twitch if you want. Otherwise, we'll be back on Friday, and then, like Chris said, we'll no live shows next week as he is on vacation, so we'll have the videos set to roll out. So we'll see you on Friday here on YouTube, but otherwise, y'all have a great one.